Imagine you are sitting in your living room, enjoying a quiet evening with a book, or perhaps watching your favorite television show. Suddenly, you catch a whiff of something strange. It smells distinctly like fish. You check the kitchen, but you haven't cooked seafood in weeks. You check the trash, and it is empty. You sniff the air again, and that pungent, fishy odor is still there, lingering without a clear source. If this ever happens to you, I want you to stop looking for leftover food and immediately check your electrical outlets. That specific smell is actually a chemical signal that the plastic components inside your walls or outlets are overheating and melting. It is often the very last warning sign you get before an electrical fire starts. I am Dr. Laura Simmons. Welcome to Senior Safety Check. I care deeply about your safety at home because staying safe in your environment is just as important to your health as diet and exercise. I've also added a helpful guide to the Senior Health Guide app, linked below. Now, let's dive in. I want to ask you a quick question to get us started. Have you ever noticed a smell in your home that you just couldn't explain, no matter how much you cleaned? Let me know in the comments. Today, we are talking about the hidden signs of electrical danger that are often overlooked until it is too late. This is not about scaring you, but rather about arming you with knowledge. As we age, we tend to stay in our homes longer. Many of us live in houses that were built 30, 40, or even 50 years ago. While these homes are filled with beautiful memories, their wiring systems were often not designed to handle the number of modern appliances we plug in today. Let's go back to that fish smell. It sounds bizarre, doesn't it? Why would a burning wire smell like fish? It comes down to the materials used to make electrical equipment. Many outlets, circuit breakers, and wire insulation are made with heat-resistant chemicals and plastics. In older components specifically, a material called bakelite or similar urea formaldehyde compounds were used. When these materials are exposed to high heat that shouldn't be there, they don't smell like a campfire. They release a gas that smells remarkably like fish or ammonia. This brings me to a story about a woman named Martha from Columbus, Ohio. Martha is 74 and has lived in her charming two-story home for over 4 decades. She is very diligent about keeping her house clean. One Tuesday evening, she walked into her guest bedroom, a room she uses mostly for sewing, and she smelled something foul. She described it exactly as we discussed, a strong, fishy odor. Martha assumed a stray cat might have brought something onto the porch outside the window, or perhaps a drain in the nearby bathroom was backed up. She closed the window and poured cleaner down the drain. The next day, the smell was stronger. She started to feel a bit dizzy, likely from the fumes, but mostly she was just frustrated. She spent 2 days scrubbing the carpet and washing the curtains, convinced something had spilled. It wasn't until her son came over to help her move a bookshelf that they found the real culprit. Hidden behind a heavy dresser was an electrical outlet. It had turned a dark, brownish-black color. The plastic faceplate had actually started to warp and melt. The heat coming from that outlet was so intense that it had scorched the back of the dresser. If they had waited another day, or perhaps even just another few hours, the heat could have ignited the wood of the dresser or the insulation inside the wall. Martha was lucky because she had help moving that furniture, but the smell was the warning she initially misunderstood. Stay with me here, because this is the important part. Martha's story highlights a critical mistake many of us make. We trust our eyes, but we often ignore our nose, or we misinterpret what it is telling us. If you smell that fishy odor, do not ignore it. Do not try to mask it with air fresheners or scented candles. That is like putting a bandage over a broken bone. You need to identify the source. Walk around your home and sniff near your outlets, your light switches, and your breaker box. If you find an area where the smell is stronger, feel the wall nearby. Does it feel warm? It should not. Your walls should be cool to the touch. If a wall switch or outlet feels warm, that is a sign of excessive resistance in the wire, which creates heat. This often happens because over time, the screws holding the wires in place can loosen. Houses vibrate slightly as traffic goes by or as the ground settles. Over 20 or 30 years, a wire that was once tight can wiggle loose. When electricity tries to jump across a loose connection, it creates a tiny arc of fire, known as arcing. This arcing generates incredible heat, enough to melt that plastic and create that fishy smell. Now, let me share a story from outside the United States, because this issue is global. Let's talk about Liam, who lives in a stone cottage in Cork, Ireland. Liam is 68 and loves his home, but the wiring was done in the late 70s. Liam didn't smell fish, but he experienced another major sign that we need to discuss: flickering lights. We often joke about flickering lights being a sign of a ghost, but the reality is much more serious. Liam noticed that every time his refrigerator kicked on in the kitchen, the lamp in his living room would dim for a second and then brighten again. He ignored it for months. He thought it was just a quirk of living in an old country house. He figured the bulb was just getting old, so he changed the bulb. The flickering continued. One evening, while watching the news, the lamp didn't just flicker, it made a distinct popping sound and went out completely. Liam went to check the fuse box. In Ireland, they often call it the consumer unit. He found that the main breaker for the living room loop was hot to the touch. The constant fluctuation in voltage, shown by the flickering light, was placing stress on his entire system. The loose wire wasn't in the lamp, it was in the junction box in the ceiling. The wire had become so hot it had severed itself. If you have lights that dim when you turn on the vacuum cleaner, or lights that flicker for no reason, this is your house telling you that the circuit is overloaded, or there is a loose connection somewhere. It is not a ghost. It is a fire hazard. This leads us to a practical step you can take today. I want you to perform a simple touch test in your home. You do not need any tools for this. Simply walk through your house and place the back of your hand, not your palm, but the back of your hand, against your light switches and the wall plates of your outlets. We use the back of the hand because it is more sensitive to temperature changes, and if there were to be a shock, your natural reflex would be to pull away rather than grab on. Everything should feel cool. If you find a switch that is warm, especially if it is a dimmer switch, a little warmth might be normal, but it should never be hot. If it is hot, or if a standard toggle switch is warm, that is a red flag. Turn off the breaker for that area immediately and call a professional. I want you to hear this clearly. Do not try to fix these internal wiring issues yourself unless you are a trained electrician. I know many of us are handy and have fixed things our whole lives. We replace faucets and paint walls. But household electricity carries a risk that isn't worth taking. The copper wires inside your walls can carry a lethal current, and if you don't tighten a wire correctly, you might actually create the very loose connection that leads to a fire later. Let's discuss another common culprit that generates these warning smells and signs: extension cords and power strips. I visit many homes where I see extension cords running under rugs or behind sofas. This is one of the most dangerous things you can do. When you run a cord under a rug, people walk on it. That foot traffic crushes the insulation inside the cord. You might not see the damage because it is wrapped in rubber, but the wires inside can break. When those internal wires break, the electricity has to work harder to bridge the gap, creating heat. Since the rug acts as a blanket, Trapping that heat, the cord can easily catch fire, and because it is under a rug, you won't see the smoke until the rug itself is burning. Consider the case of a patient of mine named Robert from sunny Florida. Robert is 78 and uses a space heater in his sunroom during the few chilly weeks of winter. He plugged his space heater into a power strip, which was then plugged into another extension cord to reach the outlet. This is what we call daisy chaining, and it is a major safety violation. Robert called me one day complaining of a headache and a strange buzzing sound he kept hearing in the sunroom. He thought he had tinnitus or some ear infection. He described a low, consistent hum that didn't go away. When he came into the clinic, his ears were fine. I asked him about his environment. I asked him if the sound stopped when he left the room. He said yes. I told him to go home and listen to his wall outlets. Sure enough, the buzzing wasn't in his head. It was coming from the power strip he had hidden behind a plant stand. The strip was overloaded by the space heater. The buzzing sound was actually the electricity vibrating the loose metal contacts inside the cheap power strip. It was struggling to pass the high current the heater demanded. Robert was lucky. He unplugged the strip and saw that one of the sockets had started to turn brown. If he had left it running overnight, the outcome could have been tragic. That buzzing sound is the audible version of the fish smell. It is energy trying to escape. So, we have the fishy smell, the flickering lights, and the buzzing sound. These are the sensory warnings, smell, sight, and sound, that your home uses to cry for help. But there is another sign that is often dismissed as just a nuisance, and that is the tripping breaker. Now, we all have tripped a breaker before. Maybe you had the microwave and the toaster oven on at the same time. You go to the garage or the basement, flip the switch back on, and everything is fine. That is the breaker doing its job. It sensed too much current and shut off to protect the wire. But what if it happens again the next day? And then again 2 days later? Many people just keep flipping it back on. They treat it like a reset button on a computer. But a circuit breaker is not a reset button. It is a safety guard. If it keeps tripping, it is telling you that there is a sustained fault on that line. When a breaker trips repeatedly, it is like a guard dog barking at a stranger. If you just close the door and ignore the dog, the stranger is still there. If you keep flipping the breaker back on without finding the cause, you are essentially telling the guard dog to be quiet while the intruder, in this case, the heat, gets closer to causing real damage. Let's talk about a specific appliance that often causes this struggle, and it brings us to our next story about a woman named Susan, who lives in a rainy town in Washington state. Susan is 64 and lives in a home built in the late 80s. She began having trouble with her clothes dryer. Every time she ran a heavy load of towels, the breaker for the laundry room would trip about halfway through the cycle. Susan assumed it was just the dryer getting old or perhaps the load was too heavy. So she would go to the garage, flip the breaker back on, and restart the dryer. She did this for about 3 weeks. She thought she was managing the problem. Then, one Saturday, she smelled that fishy odor we talked about earlier. She thought maybe some damp clothes had gotten moldy. She went to check the laundry room and found the smell was overpowering. When she pulled the dryer away from the wall to check the vent, she saw that the heavy black cord plugging into the wall was actually fused to the outlet. The constant tripping of the breaker was the system screaming for help because the connection behind the wall was loose. Every time she reset it, she forced electricity through a compromised wire, creating more and more heat until the plastic receptacle melted. Susan was incredibly fortunate that she was home and awake when the plastic finally gave way. Had she thrown a load in and gone to the grocery store, she might have returned to a tragedy. The lesson here is simple. A tripping breaker is a cry for help. Never reset it more than once without investigating why it happened. If it happens a second time, leave it off and call a professional. This brings us to another hidden danger that is often the cause of these smells and failures: pests. We don't like to think about mice or squirrels in our homes, but as the weather changes, they look for warmth. Unfortunately, the insulation around electrical wires is often made of soy-based plastics or other materials that rodents find surprisingly attractive to chew on. Consider the experience of Elena, a 70-year-old grandmother living in Toronto, Canada. Elena kept hearing scratching noises in her attic during the winter. She put down a few traps but didn't catch anything, so she stopped worrying about it. A few months later, she started noticing that the lights in her hallway would flicker when the wind blew strong outside. She also caught whiffs of that ammonia-like, fishy smell in the upstairs hallway. Elena thought the smell was coming from the attic insulation getting old or damp. She ignored it for weeks. It wasn't until her grandson came to visit and noticed a brown stain appearing on the ceiling drywall that they took action. When the electrician opened the ceiling, he found that mice had chewed the insulation off the wires completely. The bare copper wires were touching each other, creating sparks every time the wind shifted the house slightly. The fishy smell was the burning of the remaining plastic and the wooden joist nearby. If you hear scratching in your walls or ceilings, do not just think of it as a pest control problem. It is a potential electrical problem. Rodents can strip a wire bare in a single night. If you combine scratching noises with flickering lights or strange odors, you need to have your wiring inspected, not just for the sake of the lights, but for the safety of the entire structure. Let me slow down here. I want to talk about what you should actually do if you detect these signs. We titled this discussion, "Leave Immediately," and I want to explain exactly what that means so you don't feel panicked, but you do feel prepared. If you smell burning plastic, fish, or eggs, and you cannot identify a cooking source, your first move is to touch the wall switches and outlets in that room with the back of your hand. If they are hot, or if you see smoke coming from an outlet, you must leave the house. Do not try to unplug the appliance. Do not try to throw water on it. Electrical fires react poorly to water. Just get yourself and your family out and call emergency services from your mobile phone outside. However, if you smell the odor but do not see smoke and do not feel heat, you have a brief window to act safely. Go to your main circuit breaker panel. If you know which room the smell is coming from, turn off the breaker for that specific room. If you are unsure and you feel safe doing so, turn off the main breaker at the top of the panel to cut power to the entire house. Then, call a licensed electrician immediately. Tell them you smell burning electrical components. This is an emergency call for them, and they will prioritize you. Many seniors worry about the cost of calling an electrician. I understand that living on a fixed income makes unexpected repairs stressful, but I want you to weigh the cost of a service call against the cost of your home and your safety. An electrical inspection is much cheaper than recovering from a fire. There is also a modern safety device I want you to know about. It is called an arc fault circuit interrupter, or AFCI. In the past, breakers only tripped if there was too much power flowing, like a flood. But these new AFCI breakers are smart. They listen to the electricity. They can detect the specific static noise that a loose or arcing wire makes, the kind of sputtering that causes the fish smell, and they cut the power before a fire can start. If you live in an older home, you do not necessarily need to rewire the entire house to be safer. You can simply ask an electrician to replace your old standard breakers with these new AFCI breakers. It is a significant upgrade in safety that creates a shield around your home without tearing open your walls. Let's touch on one final culprit that is very common in bedrooms: the electric blanket and the heating pad. These items are wonderful for aching joints and cold nights, but they are also frequent causes of electrical odors. We often fold electric blankets when we store them. Over years of folding and unfolding, the tiny heating wires inside the fabric can break or kink. When you plug in a damaged blanket, that kink creates a hot spot. You might smell that singed, metallic, or fishy odor coming from the bed itself. If you ever smell an odd scent when using a heating pad or blanket, turn it off immediately. Look for brown spots on the fabric. If you see any discoloration, cut the cord so no one else uses it, and throw it away. Never buy these items secondhand, as you do not know how they were stored or if the internal wiring is compromised. I want to leave you with a thought about the environment we live in. Our homes are filled with more synthetic materials than ever before. Curtains, couch cushions, and carpets are made of plastics and foams that burn much faster and hotter than the wood and cotton of the past. 30 years ago, you might have had 15 minutes to escape a house fire. Today, fire safety experts say you may have as little as 3 minutes once a flame takes hold. This is why the nose is your first line of defense. That fishy smell appears long before the flame. It is the chemical breakdown of the plastic before it ignites. By respecting that smell and acting on it, you are buying yourself the most valuable thing in the world: time. We have covered a lot of ground today, from the fishy smell of melting bakelite to the danger of flickering lights and tripping breakers. We talked about Martha's dresser, Liam's loose connection, Robert's power strip, Susan's dryer, and Elena's pests. These aren't just stories. They are reminders that our homes are living systems that wear out over time. You don't need to live in fear of your electricity. You just need to respect it. Take a moment this week to do the walkthrough we discussed. Feel your outlets, check your cords, sniff the air in the rooms you don't use often. If something feels off, trust your gut. Your intuition is often faster than your logic. Being proactive is the best medicine for your home, just as it is for your body. Tightening a loose outlet plate takes 5 minutes. Replacing a worn-out extension cord costs a few dollars. These small investments yield a massive return in peace of mind. You deserve to sleep soundly, knowing your home is safe and secure. If videos like this help you, hit subscribe so you don't miss our next update on staying healthy and safe at home. We talked about the hidden warning signs of electrical fires, including fishy odors, warm outlets, and flickering lights, and why you must act fast. Even small daily steps can help you feel steadier, safer, and more confident as you navigate your golden years. This video is for education only and is not personal medical advice. Always consult your doctor or a professional for your specific situation.